Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, it's been a little while since we've visited Overly Sarcastic Productions. That's what we're going to do today. I saw this video and I thought it looked like an interesting one to do. It's from 7 months ago. It's called History Summarized 1900, The World Before the War. And by the war, they mean the Great War, or what we now know as World War I. One of the most important events in terms of its impact on history that has ever happened. It's something that I have just poured myself into studying as much as I could over the last couple of years. Ended up being the topic that got me onto the History Channel for the first time in the Great War documentary. Great experience. Hope you guys enjoyed that if you checked it out. Also want to let you know we are doing a tour of Western Front battlefields this October, end of October. I planned this entire itinerary myself in conjunction with one of the best World War I tour groups you can possibly work with. So I'm excited. We're going to have one of their guides. You'll also have me, who has been to most of these places, and I've done videos about a lot of them. So I'll be adding some things here and there. I'm also going to be bringing a bunch of objects that belonged to soldiers who fought there. We're going to be taking some medals to graves of some of these guys and different things. So it's going to be a really like a once-in-a-lifetime memorable trip. So the link is down in the description if you want to check it out, see the itinerary. Just $500 is all you got to put down in order to be able to reserve your spot. And we can take about 40 people on this one. So right now, about 10 of us going. We need to hit at least 20 in order to make this trip happen. So check it out. Hope you can join us. Let's go ahead and dive into this one.
The Floof Squad has arrived. Fresh off their star turn in the best-selling graphic novel Aurora, Kendall, Linua, Falston, Aaron are now available as enamel pins in our merch shop.
Cool.
And for totally innocuous plot reasons, they all glow in the dark. Grab them while they're in stock, link below. At the outbreak of the First World War in the summer of 1914, the most powerful empires in European history jumped gleefully into the continent's most collectively lethal event since the Black Death.
I know he's using hyperbole and things like that, but they definitely were not jumping. Well, I shouldn't say. There were some people who probably saw it gleefully, mostly the military people in some of these countries, but most of these people did not want to jump gleefully into a war that killed millions.
Show our enemies a good time, win glory on the battlefield, secure the future of our empire, and be home by Christmas. What the hell were they thinking? And why now, after a century of quiet since the last pan-European conflict? But also, while it's clear that back-to-back world wars had a rather transformative effect on history, what kind of world was lost by that transformation? And that especially is the question I want to answer today. So, we will not be diving into the trenches, chucking poison gas, or inventing the tank from first principles, but instead looking across the continent at the turn of the 1900s to catalog our major players and understand how they collectively engineered the total destruction of their world order.
So, as we always say when it comes to history, it's all connected, right? So, a lot of people say, well, World War II happened because of World War I. Well, yeah, that's true, but World War I happened because of the Russo-Japanese War, and because of the Franco-Prussian War, and because of the things that happened in 1848, and of course the Schleswig-Holstein War, and the German, the Prusso-Austrian War, and the Napoleonic Wars, and the Congress of Vienna, and the American Revolution, and the French Revolution. It's all connected. One leads to another, leads to another, leads to another.
So, to understand the world before the war, let's do some history. The first and most essential thing to understand about Europe in 1900 is that the map was the simplest it had been since Rome.
That's an amazing point. I've never heard anybody word it that way, but it absolutely is the simplest. I mean, just the fact that the Holy Roman Empire doesn't exist anymore dramatically simplifies the map. You have all of these consolidations happening. I'm sure he'll talk about
Gone was the continent of free cities, states within kingdoms,
right,
or distant exclaves held together by family dynasties. This was empires. And
this is also the time when you're shifting from the idea of empires that are under people, like the Habsburgs, for example, and you're getting more into national borders and the modern idea of nationalism. And you've got consolidation. You've got the German Empire formed at the beginning of the 1870s, and you have the Austria-Hungarian Empire that has formed. Italy is now one united kingdom again. The Ottoman Empire has been an empire for a long time, but it's starting to fracture, and you're starting to see, with the simplification of the map, now it's starting to desimplify a little bit, places like the Balkans.
They were big. At a glance, we've got Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and the vast but frail Ottoman Empire, with states like Serbia and Italy down a rung on the power scale with ambitions to join the big leagues.
Yeah, Italy has formed roughly around the same time that Germany has, within not too long of a period. France and England are the really old nations at this point, comparatively speaking. Ottomans have been around for a long time. The Russians have been a relatively large empire for several centuries now. Sweden has declined. Poland has disappeared off the map.
Now, speaking of ambition, despite the cultural, linguistic, and structural differences between all of these states, they shared in the notion that they had won, or almost won, everything their state wanted. Britain had the greatest navy on Earth and the largest empire in human history. France possessed an overseas empire and the capital of European culture. Italy and Germany each finally unified after centuries of divisions. Austria's Habsburg dynasty united a diverse realm under a single constitutional order. Russia...
Yeah, see, that's a big difference between, say Austria-Hungary and France or Germany. Yes, there are differences, right? I mean, parts of Germany are Catholic, parts are Protestant. Parts have been under monarchies, parts have been, under different kinds of governments. But they all, for the most part, speak the same language. They all have a relatively similar culture. Austria-Hungary's got so many different languages and so many different things going on. It's just a completely different thing.
Russia was very big and growing its influence in the Balkans as the patron empire of Orthodox Slavs, and the Ottoman Empire was putting in a passable effort.
It's interesting, he said that in passing, right? The patron empire of Orthodox Slavs, and really loud people on the street. Yeah, this is a key part of this, right? Because you have Slavs that are a part of the Balkans, and some of them are part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Russia has kind of appointed itself to be the protector of those people who have a similar heritage.
To not die after a century of breakaways from its territory. Hey, small victories. Now, after centuries of varyingly convoluted backstories to get each empire to this point in 1900, they all had valid reasons to believe they were crushing it or going to be very soon. But there is, as it happens, a word for this air of supreme self-assurance, of confidence verging on arrogance. That would be hubris, and I believe it informs every layer of our reading, because the genuine triumphs of turn-of-the-century Europe are inseparable from their swaggering domino chain to disaster.
But there's also an element of balance of power that's going on, right? In the aftermath, you have the Franco-Prussian War, 1870-71. Napoleon III is overthrown, and now Germans have established themselves as the major power, land power anyway, on the continent. And they are surrounded on either side by pretty strong powers in France and Russia, whose combined might can eventually overtake them. But they also look at the British and they see the most powerful navy on Earth, and they have a bit of an arms race that starts.
Not only means great power politics, but also culture, ideology, and technology that pushed Europe from peaceable equilibrium into industrial-scale total war. So, keep all these factors in mind as we meet our unlucky players. First off, the British Empire. Following a century of whirlwind colonization, they could take laps around the globe without ever leaving the Crown's domain. With land on every continent and undisputed control of the seas, Britannia's rule over them waves brought a staggering amount of natural resources and wealth, most of which found their way back to the Isles, either as inputs for their mechanized factories or as cash to be cataloged in the financial capital of the world, London. Being conveniently separated from the rest of the continent by the Channel, Britain spent the 1800s playing empire off in the corner on the assumption that Europe's internal hoopla didn't really matter to them.
And the fact that they're separated, not only kind of ideologically, like in your mind, I should say, there's that separation, right? And even today, a lot of people, when you go to Britain, which by the time you guys are watching this, that's where I'll be, when they talk about Europe, they don't think of themselves as Europe. They think Europe is the continent, and they're something different. And that has protected them for most of that time. The only reason Napoleon wasn't able to defeat the British is because he didn't have a navy to defeat the British. After, they lose the Battle of Trafalgar, there's nothing he can do. But had they been connected by land, Napoleon would have won.
By 1900, this illusion of splendid isolation was shattered once they realized everyone else was catching up on industrialization and military might, and Britain, diplomatically speaking, had no friends. Meanwhile, social disruptions from labor strikes, women's rights protests, and the very real potential for factional violence in Ireland between unionists and nationalists left this world-conquering empire looking mighty fragile at home.
That's a fair point. I mean, the British Empire, for all we talk about Britannia ruling the waves and the powerful navy and all that stuff, there are a lot of potential fractures there, right? You know, we're not quite to where India is really going to start rising up yet. But you've got a lot of other areas, especially Ireland, where you do need to worry about that.
Hopping across to the mainland, we find France. Having spent the last century ping-ponging between monarchies and republics, featuring another Napoleon in charge between 1852 and 1870 in the Second Empire period, get new material, the state reconstituted as the Third French Republic after a walloping by neighboring Prussia that cost them the territory of Alsace-Lorraine. And Republic,
which is a territory that had gone back and forth for a good bit of time, and this is going to be an area that's going to go back to France after all of the early 20th century fighting takes place.
Remained through the turn of the century. Though they speed ran the formation of a new colonial empire in West Africa and Vietnam, the real gem in the Republic's crown? That metaphor was the city of Paris. After a century of revolutions, citywide renovations, more wars, restorations, and spiffy new landmarks for a trio of World's Fairs, the city in 1900 was the capital of culture in Europe.
So, fun fact about the Eiffel Tower, when it was built, the people in Paris hated it. And you can see how much taller it was even then over all the buildings. And to this day, like the tall buildings in Paris are actually like way over here, like on the hilltops and stuff, not anywhere near there. They've got rules about that. But it was originally only supposed to stand for 20 years, then they were going to tear it down. It's been all kinds of different colors over time. It's been yellow, it's been red, it's been black. You know, they paint it a different color every time.
Home to exciting new art styles like Impressionism and Art Nouveau, my beloved, Parisians also made art out of new technology in the form of motion picture cinema. Paris in this so-called Belle Époque was radically imaginative, hyper-modern, and wildly unequal. While the Nouveau Riche lived it up in the height of fashion, much of the city was destitute. Not quite so belle after all, perhaps. Now, stepping slightly east, the single biggest shock to the continent came from a newly formed German empire. As a result of the 1871 tussle with France, the small but mighty state of Prussia unified its German-speaking neighbors into a single nation with an alarmingly high potential for ass-kicking.
Yeah.
Prussia's hypermilitarism suddenly had a huge pool of manpower and resources to draw on in a united Germany.
That's a great point. You know, Prussia always had that very kind of elite level military. You know, the joke was always, you know, in most cases you have a state that has an army. Well, the Prussian army has a state, is what they would say, right? But now you add the industrial power and the population and the agriculture and all the other stuff that a professional, powerful military needs to really fuel itself. And everybody else on the continent is looking at this newly unified Germany and thinking, oh boy, this could be big trouble.
And Chancellor Otto von Bismarck was keenly aware of how big a target that put on their backs, so he played a careful game of diplomacy to avoid everyone else in Europe ganging up to batter down his door. But around 1890, the new Kaiser, Wilhelm II, took a
Moron. He's Queen Victoria's grandson, by the way, her eldest grandson.
More satisfying approach, one that he felt Germany deserved. That meant a colonial empire in Africa, a huge buildup of the navy to make Germany a true world power, and not so subtle hints that they wanted more living space on the continent.
And that's why I say moron, because he gets rid of Bismarck eventually, and Bismarck was a brilliant politician who strengthened Germany without making them seem like the bad guys, you know.
Uh-oh. This maximalist strategy terrified the rest of Europe into a military arms race and drew millennium-long rivals Britain and France into a partnership.
That can't be He's doing a really good job of analyzing all this. This cannot be overstated, right? The British and French have hated each other, right? All this time. They've been enemies. They've you know, always kind of had a disdain for each other. And the British are the main reason why Napoleon eventually, you know, ends up being toppled. And by creating this situation where you kind of make yourself the threat, you're driving them together.
That, if nothing else, is how you know Germany's rapid ascent spelled danger. Yet, if so powerful an empire was ruled by such an erratic Kaiser, was that not also dangerous? Coincidentally, south across the Alps, the Kingdom of Italy had also unified in 1871, but they, however, did not provoke the same fear as the United Germany, which is... yeah, that's fair. The Savoyard Kingdom of Sardinia had succeeded in liberating Italy from its various Austrian and Spanish overlords, but exciting as that was for the Italian populace, it did not elevate them to the level of a great power. Though it does demonstrate the promise and the perils associated with a popular ideology of the day, nationalism. In its purest form, this is the idea that we should have a nation. The we typically being a group sharing a cultural, ethnic, and especially linguistic identity, and nation being one sovereign state free of outside interference.
Don't conflate this definition of nationalism with the modern connotation that has kind of a different meaning, right? This is really about the identity of having a nation, right? The idea of Germany, the idea of France, the idea of Italy as just being, I'm not Roman, I'm Italian. I'm not Bavarian, I'm German. It's that kind of thing.
At a glance, the Italian peninsula, unified in government by Italians, should be GG, but there remained pockets of Italian communities in Dalmatia, the Swiss Alps, the Ionian Islands, southern France and Corsica, and Malta. However, much of these areas were multi-ethnic and even minority Italian in some cases.
And even in Italy, there's different dialects, and sometimes somebody from northern Italy and someone from southern Italy, they're both speaking a dialect of Italian, but they can hardly understand each other. So there's a lot of division with the culture and the language and those sorts of things because they had been these smaller states, some republics and some principalities and different things for so long.
Yet the mission of nationalism demands these so-called irredenta, or unredeemed lands, get added to the state. And Italy was not alone in this, as other new nations, such as Serbia, had bold visions for their future domains and regional influence.
Notice who controls a lot of these lands that other people want. Austria-Hungary.
Ultimately, the driving force is ambition, which, plot twist, is also the essence of colonialism. Italy played a popular game. As far as the perils of nationalism, nobody was more terrified than the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This dual monarchy, ruled by the infamous Habsburg family, had long since cooled it with the inbreeding and seemingly overcorrected by having the most complicated population makeup of any European power. Sporting a mix of Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Slovaks, Ukrainians, Romanians, Slovenes, Italians, Croats, Serbs, Bosnians, and others, the empire understood the rising tide of nationalism was coming at their expense.
And just think about it just from a strictly military perspective. When you go to form an army, you've got guys from all of these different places who might have different cultures and different ideas about how a military works. They speak different languages. Their officers might not speak the same language that they do. You're at a disadvantage right off the bat.
Especially in the Balkans. This region had belonged to the Ottoman Empire for centuries, but as territories got carved out to make new nations like Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria, the Balkans presented a fluid geopolitical venue to project influence in the Ottoman vacuum.
And this has been the front line between Islam and Christianity for several centuries at this point. Once the Reconquista happens on the Iberian Peninsula, this is kind of ground zero for that. That's why you have the sieges, the different sieges of Vienna that happen, and you have all this fighting that goes on right up through the modern day. You have the Crimean War that happens in this same region. And now you're going to have the Balkan Wars.
Yet, Austria vastly overplayed its hand, formally annexing Bosnia in 1908 and infuriating ethnic Serbs within their empire and the neighboring Kingdom of Serbia, whose dreams of hegemony over the Balkans would not be stopped by some meddlesome Habsburg. So when an Austrian archduke visited the regional capital of Sarajevo as a show of authority, some stuff went down. We'll revisit that in a minute. On the other side of the Balkan bust-up was the last and by far largest great power on the continent, the Russian Empire. Viewing itself as the heir to the Byzantines and thus the Third Rome. Doubt.
Yeah, you don't really think about that, right? You don't, like in your mind, you don't think, okay, they're the heirs to the Roman Empire. But they did see themselves that way.
Russia acted as the patron of Orthodox Christians everywhere, which gave them a keen interest in liberating the heavily Orthodox Balkans from Ottoman rule and propping up friendly states in the power vacuum. So Austria's Serbian nationalist nightmare was Russia's exact strategy. Meanwhile, on the astoundingly vast home front, the overwhelming majority of Russia's 125 million inhabitants lived in the countryside, and industrialization was very slow to chip away at the dominance of agriculture in the Russian economy. So
Russia's biggest strength is its population, but its biggest weakness is probably how spread out that population is over such a large area. Makes things, whereas the British, their two largest, like in modern days, I don't know what the populations were at this time, but in modern times, the two largest cities in the United Kingdom are an hour apart by train, Birmingham and London. Russia, you take a train and you're taking days to get from one end to the other. So it's a whole different animal, and you've got a kind of out of touch royal family that also has close ties to the British, and it's just a mess.
But despite Russia's general massiveness, mobilizing a powerful and modern army was tricky, as painfully demonstrated by the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 5, when a European empire got stomped by a foreign power for the first time in modern history and nearly triggered a Russian Revolution that same year. But hey, crisis averted, right? Give it 12 years and things will be back to normal. And finally, down in the southeast corner of the continent, coming off a solid century of territory losses and the near total evaporation of its Balkan holdings in 1913, we have the master of the Mediterranean turned sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, they often call them the sick man of Europe, and this has been a slow degradation over hundreds of years, and a lot of it centers on just the quality of the people in charge in many cases. And, of course, you have the changing tide of history when it comes to government and the spread of ideas.
They are also here. Cool. So, with our cast established, we can notice a handful of trends. God, the slander. For all these nations, the 1900s brought hopes and opportunities right alongside frustrations and deep fears. This is as true of geopolitics as technology, with industrial innovations changing up the shape of economies, the face of cities, the means of communication and travel, and the instruments for mechanized warfare. Machine guns, dreadnought-class battleships, warplanes, and poison gases were just as much a consequence of this new world as cars and cinema. Meanwhile,
you have the combination of rapid advances in technology with the fuel of the last 150 years of industrial revolution behind it. And it's a recipe for this industrial scale slaughter.
all of these states beamed with optimism for their futures while struggling with entrenched internal problems, from nationalism to political grievances to fierce wealth inequalities. Europe in 1900 was in equilibrium, but a fundamentally unstable one, both between these great powers as well as within each of them. So, how did they keep the peace with each other throughout the 1800s, and what finally went so catastrophically wrong? Well, after the Napoleonic Wars, Europe collectively decided, wars and revolutions suck actually,
fantastic series about the Congress of Vienna was done by Historia Civilis. We took a look at that. I'll try to remember to put the link up on the screen, on the end screen for that, so you can check it out, my look at that
Not do that again. So they hatched a system to maintain the great power status quo and resolve their disputes through diplomacy. It had several hiccups, but largely worked as intended to preserve everyone's spheres of influence and prevent any shakeup to the balance of powers. If one player started practicing their Napoleon impression, the others would promptly form a coalition to smack him down. Such as in the 1853 Crimean War, when Russia got grabby in the Balkans on account of that patron empire of all Orthodox Slavs routine, so Britain and France put aside their differences to help the Ottomans preserve their domain. Wild on the face of it, but in service of a stable world order, logical. These alliances were fluid and fiercely pragmatic, which is why Bismarck's policy for the recently unified Germany was do not rock the boat or they'll join up and kick our ass.
Right, you don't want them to do that, and this is why having a savvy politician matters so much, especially when you have a hereditary monarchy.
This whole diplomatic arrangement, known as the Concert of Europe, negotiated several of the century's geopolitical affairs, such as containing the revolutions of 1848, suppressing the Boxer Rebellion in China, and hashing out the mass colonization of Africa, all of which was violent. So sure, diplomacy, but only among the clique of great powers, and always with the overriding objective to maintain Europe's global primacy and keep their established regimes in power. Now,
this is all the long memory of the Napoleonic Wars, right? You know, everybody remembers the millions of dead when it just kind of goes unchecked and you have all these shifting alliances and these different groups that are ganging up on one another. And so they're trying to, this is like an early form of United Nations or, something like that, or League of Nations. It's Europe trying to police itself before things get out of hand.
If the esteemed concert was so hung up on balancing their powers, what went wrong? Arguably, two main factors. First being the states outside of the concert who sought the exact opposite of a balance of powers, such as the upstart states in the Balkan Wars of 1912-13, who wanted as much land as they can get and completely ignored the concert's attempts to negotiate a partition.
That's why it's said that toward the end of his life, someone asked Otto von Bismarck about keeping peace in Europe, and he said that peace would end probably because of some damn fool thing in the Balkans.
Second was the nimble network of great power alliances calcifying into two rival camps. The German Empire pursued defensive alliances with Austria-Hungary, Russia, briefly, and Italy, resulting in a triple alliance from 1882 onward.
Right.
After Germany began its big aggressive armament, France signed an alliance with Russia in 1894 to box Germany in and increase their chance of clawing back Alsace-Lorraine from German captivity in the event of a conflict. Similarly terrified by them, Britain made a loose agreement, or entente, with France in 1904 and Russia in 1907 to complete their own triangle of teamwork. The result...
Now, it's important to note that by the time of World War I, the British are not in a strictly defensive alliance the way that the French and the Russians are. In other words, the French and the Russians, when one comes in, the other one has to. The British aren't tied that way. The British get pulled into the war by Belgium. Belgium is right here as kind of this buffer state between France and northern Germany, and the British are treaty bound to defend Belgium if they're attacked, and Germany knows this.
Of all this was hardly a fluid balance, but rather two opposing spring traps surrounded by small nations whose stated goals were to flip the status quo. But I think there's also a secret third thing implicit in all this, which is how the idealistic national romanticism of the 1800s hardened into a kind of cultural chauvinism. Most nations, big and small, thought they had that sauce, that we're so great, we deserve even more, and if anyone gets in our way, I think we can take them. And that is the kind of hubristic...
But they have different ideas about what it looks like to take them. You know, like the Germans, they won a very quick victory over the French in 1870. And they're looking to do that again and then turn on Russia and only take on one of them at a time.
Arrogance, which turns a regional crisis like an archduke getting shot and extrapolates it into empire-destroying continental war. Watch it play out. June 28, 1914. Austria's Franz Ferdinand is assassinated by Slavic nationalist Gavrilo Princip. Austria blames Serbia for the plot, and Germany gives its ally a blank check to punish Serbia however it wants.
Yep.
Austria declares war on July 28, and Serbia's...
Obviously, he's vastly simplifying this, but this is basically what happened.
Mobilizes its army toward the Austrian border. Then Germany escalates, declaring war on Russia on August 1st, and because of their defensive alliance, France too on August 3rd, crossing neutral Belgium to do so. Britain demands Germany leave Belgium, Kaiser refuses, and Britain declares war on the 4th. Now,
and Germany had gone to the king of the Belgians, King Albert, and basically said, hey, we just want to pass through. We want to go around this strongly defended part of France and go in through here. And just let us pass through. We don't want war with you. But Albert was like, no, you're not violating our sovereign territory to invade another nation.
Consider the motivations. Serbia wants a bigger state to call their own. Austria wants to knock their meddlesome neighbor down a peg. Russia wants to wedge further into the Balkans via their ally. Germany wants to kneecap Russia before they fully industrialize. France wants Alsace-Lorraine back more than anything else on planet Earth. And Britain wants to stop Germany from overtaking their navy.
I think those are probably generally the big ideas, right? I mean, there's a lot more to it than that.
Wants something and think this is their chance, their excuse to do it in self-defense.
And there was this sense among most of these powers that at some point this was going to happen. And for the Germans in particular, they felt that the longer it went without happening, the weaker their position was. So as far as they were concerned, the sooner the better.
That's why within 1 week of Austria's move, the entire springtrap had sprung, and the great powers embarked gleefully upon mechanized total war, soon to be joined by the Ottomans and Italy. Now, I know this looks messy, but don't worry, it'll all be over by Christmas.
All right, I was really impressed by that. I thought he did a great job for a 14-minute video. He packed a lot in there, and I think that was a pretty good analysis of what was going on. But obviously we can get a lot deeper into some of these topics. I did a whole series looking at Extra History's views on the July crisis, everything that went down in that time between Franz Ferdinand's assassination and the declarations of war, which was a brilliant series and I thought really well portrayed. We've done a lot of videos taking a look at through Epic History's lens, looking at the war year by year and really breaking down all the details of the major battles and what was going on. So you can check out all of that. I have a World War I playlist. If you just go to the playlists on the homepage, you can see every video I've done about World War I. Check that out. Thanks for watching.